In this video, we're going to render a portfolio image here in Substance Painter using iRay. Now, right before we get started, I do want to make a few changes here to this glass. So here, with the fill layer selected for the glass, I do want to make sure that this color is set to pure white here for the rendering in iRay. Now, we've already set up our roughness material and everything, but I forgot to add the dirt. So here I'm going to come over to the shelf, I'm going to grab this dirt smart material and then just drag and drop that here into my 3D view. Now let's go into the dirt group and let's go to the top level MG mask editor, and I'm going to make an adjustment here to this position gradient. So let me take a look at this top to bottom. So here I'll do something like that. Now here for the base color, what I'm going to want to do is drop the opacity value of this dirt. So I might keep it at something, I don't know, maybe around 60. And one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to these arms, Control-Alt right click to select the arm material, and I want to just paint some dirt collection here on the base part of these arms here. So here where I have the top, where I have this MG mask editor, I'm going to add a paint effect into here. And let's come over here to my shelf and my brushes. I'm just going to add the Dirt 2 brush. And then I'm just going to go in and just start to paint just some dirt collection right here. Okay, so now that I've made those final tweaks, I'm ready to get started rendering here in iRay. Alright, so in order to activate iRay, here at the top of the viewport, I can just click this camera button, and this is going to put me in rendering mode within iRay. Alright, so now that I have this set, actually here, let me do one thing. Let me go back here to my real-time mode, and I want to make sure that I'm on this glass texture set, because we're going to set that up first. So Control-Alt right-click here to make sure we're on the glass texture set, which we are. And now let's jump back over here into iRay, because on that glass texture set, remember we set a separate shader for that, we're going to want to change some of these shader settings. Here we're going to come down to refraction, and I want to set the refraction slider all the way to 1. For the refractive index here, or the IOR, I can leave this at around 1.5 to 1.6. Here, let's just set this to 1.6. Now, I might want to change some of the opacity here for that dirt as well. So let's jump back out of iRay rendering mode. Let's go back here to this dirt, and let's lower that opacity, maybe close to 40 here. Now we'll jump back into iRay rendering mode. And so you can see that lightens that glass here just a little bit more. Alright, so that's going to take care of our glass. Now, what we want to do is start to set up our environment. So here I'm going to come over to the display settings, and I'm going to come up here to my environment settings. First off, we have this dome here, and what we have is a sphere with ground, so I'm just going to set this here to sphere, and so you can see that that kind of gets rid of that ground portion there. Now, if I don't want to actually have the background, I can click this clear color option. And so now I can just see that I have just a clear color, I have my rendering here, and I also have a shadow. Now I can just use the same keyboard navigations that I've been using inside of Painter to frame up my shot. Here you can see that we do have this ground option, and this is going to provide me here with my ground shadow. Now I can also come over here to my camera view, and I can set things like my field of view, focal distance, and aperture. We'll get to those in just a moment. But for now, let's go back over here to our environment settings, and we can start to take a look at maybe changing the environment map. So just clicking this mini shelf button, we can choose some different environments. So here I might try this glazed patio, and then we can see the different results we're going to get here. So if I hold down the shift key, right mouse button, I can rotate that environment so I can interactively see what this lighting is going to be like. And then here in the environment map, I can just try a couple different options until I find the environment that I want to use for my portfolio image. Okay, so here I've just gone through a couple of the environment maps, and I've chosen this Moderaine_3. I've also come over here to my camera settings and just dropped my field of view just a little bit. And so I've framed up my shot this way, again just holding down the shift key and the right mouse button left to right to rotate the environment just to get kind of a more dramatical direct lighting here. All right, so we'll go back over here to our environment tab, and for the exposure, I can actually start to just increase this exposure value here if I want to just brighten this image a little bit. So as you can see, just kind of setting up the basics of the iRay renderer is actually quite simple. There's not a ton of settings that we really have to worry about. So we've set our dome here. Now, another thing that we can start to play around with here is maybe our resolution settings. So let's come over here to the rendering part of this. Let me just pull this panel down here. And so you can see that we have this override viewport resolution. So right now I'm just rendering at whatever the resolution is of the viewport. But I can choose this override viewport resolution button, and then I can set a specific resolution here. So for example, I think I'm going to just type in 2048 by 2048. And so I'm just going to get my resolution set like this, again, because I have this viewport resolution, override viewport resolution enabled. I've also enabled the caustic sampler, so this is on. Now, in terms of rendering, you can see here that we have this iRay info, and status says done, gives me our resolution, and so on. Now, iRay is pretty simple. It's just really going to render based on this max time value. So right now, you can see the max time is set to 10 seconds. So iRay is going to render for 10 seconds and then stop. Now here I'm seeing that I still have a lot of noise and things like that, so I'm obviously going to need to render a bit more to refine this image. So what I can do here is I can set this from seconds to minutes. So in my case, I'm going to set this just to 120 seconds, which is going to equal 2 minutes. Now you can see that iRay just begins rendering. Now it doesn't start over from scratch, it just starts to refine from where it last left off. So iRay is continuing to render here. Now, here you also have these min and max samples. And here we have this iteration. So right now we can see that we're on sample, let's say here, this is on 58 out of, or 64 out of 1,000. So what this means is that iRay is going to render for a max 120 seconds, or it will render until the max samples is hit. So whichever one of these two comes first. So for example, if I render for 120 seconds and I didn't get to this max samples, iRay is going to stop. If I'm rendering here for this 2 minutes and before this 2 minutes is up, iRay does hit this maximum 1,000 samples, then it would stop rendering before this max time is set. So really it's just about time and your samples. And here I can see that I'm rendering here. I'm at 1 minute 14 seconds. So there's no way we're going to hit this max sample. We're definitely going to hit this 2 minutes and then iRay is going to stop. So we'll notice that a lot of this noise is already starting to kind of smooth out. So the idea becomes you just let iRay render until you get the result that you want. Like, oh, this is great, this is good enough, I'll use this. So while this is still rendering here, I'm going to come over to my camera settings, and we have some post effects we can work with. So here I'm going to enable my post effects, and I can take a look at some things like glare. So let's enable the glare option here, and we'll increase our luminance. So now we're starting to get a little glare bloom here, and I can decrease the threshold, so we'll get something like this. Now here's where the shape is set. I'm just going to switch this to bloom. So now I get this little bloom glint here as a post-process effect, which is pretty cool. And so I'll just play around with this a little bit, something like that. Now we also have this little vignette, so I'm going to turn on this vignette and let's just increase our strength so we can get something like that. And then here we can come up to our tone mapping and color correction and start to play around with these values as well. So here I'll enable my tone mapping, and here I can increase my exposure as well as my gamma. And then here under color correction, so we'll enable color correction, we can saturate the image, desaturate it, and so on. We can increase the contrast if we want, as well as our brightness. We can change the temperature, so we can just kind of color grade this image. So what I think I might do is just set it to be, you know, something like this here, sepia tone if you want to do something like that. It's just a matter of getting just like a nice color grade to get the look that you want. Now I think this glare's a bit too intense, so either I can drop the luminance like this or I can increase the threshold, so I might just do something like that there. So we can see that iRay had finished rendering while I was playing around here with some of my color grading, and so we were able to get 221 samples out of that 1,000, and we stopped, you know, right here at 2 minutes. Now, one of the things that I had forgotten to do, let's drop here out of iRay mode and let's go back here into my viewport. Now you'll see that I see this crazy bloom right here, and that's because here in the real-time viewport, we can play around with these post effects as well. So if I come over here to my display tab and I come over here to the camera settings, I can disable these post effects. So we can see these in the real-time viewport as well. But what I wanted to do was come over here to my texture set settings here. Let's go back to, let's say, our base. And what we're going to want to do is switch our resolution here. So let's come over to our texture set settings, and you'll notice that the resolution was set to 2K. So we want to come in here and we want to recompute all of these textures that we've been working on. We want to recompute these as 4K. And that again is another benefit to Substance Painter, is that you're not locked at this resolution. So Substance Painter is not merely just upscaling or up-resing this stuff. It's actually redrawing everything we did to recompute our textures at this true 4K image. So we're going to just get a little better quality by switching here to 4K. So let me just do that real quickly here for each one of my texture sets. So we'll switch this guy to 4K. Here you can see the compute bar. It's actually pretty quick. And so we're going to regenerate that texture at 4K. And here, let's pick another texture set. Switch this guy here to 4K. Okay, so here I've switched all my textures to 4K. We'll jump back over here to iRay. And here in my case, since I moved the camera, you can see that the camera position changes, and also it looks like my refraction setting didn't get saved. So let me come back over here to my shader settings, and I'm already, if I can remember correctly, I'm on the glass, so I'm just going to set those refraction settings now. So we'll set that back to 1, and now I'm just going to reframe up my shot. Okay, so made just a few more changes again. What I did was I just came over to my environment settings and I changed the environment map. So this time I'm using Bus Garage, and then I just rotated it into position so I could get the lighting that I wanted. I felt like this environment map was just giving me a little bit extra variation in the lighting that just made the overall rendering look a little better. Alright, so now that I have this set up, and like I said, we've gone through our camera settings and played around with some of these post effects, one of the last things I want to show you here is how we can use depth of field here using iRay. So we have a depth of field version which is part of post effects, and you can see that here, or we can actually use a 3D depth of field by just simply enabling this aperture setting here. So if I enable this aperture, you can see that, well, everything's blurry, and instead of just setting this focal distance, what I can do is just hold down the control key and middle mouse click to set the focal distance. So for example, if we just kind of zoom in here on an area, so let's just frame up our shot. So we'll do something like this. And then we can hold down the control key, middle mouse click on an area, and it's going to set the focal distance. And just to really drive this home, let's just increase that aperture value. Again, control, left click here to set a focal point. And here we'll let iRay just kind of refine this just a little bit. And so now this is how we can work with some depth of field. Alright, so here I've finally framed up everything like I want. I've just gone through and just set some of my tone mapping. You can see I've increased the exposure. I've come over here to the vignette. That's been enabled, as well as just played around here with the glare. Now for the white balance, you see that I can lower that just a little bit. And then here, once again, like I said, I've switched that environment map here to this Bus Garage. And in my case, I just let the max time just finish out here at this 2 minutes. And let's say that this is refined the image enough and I'm ready to just save this. So in order to save the render, we just scroll down here at the top of the render settings, and you can see that we have this Save Render button, or you can hit the Share button so you can log into your ArtStation account and upload this directly to your ArtStation portfolio right here from Substance Painter, or you can choose just Save Render and just save this as an image file. So now, if you want to export the textures out of Substance Painter, you can come up here to the File menu and choose Export Textures. Now here in the Export Textures document window, you can see that we have a list of all of our texture sets, and these texture sets show which channels we can export with. And so we can enable all of the texture sets and then click Export to do a batch export process. Here we can set the resolution, so you can see it's set to the document size by default, but we can also go to 8K as well if you want to export 8K maps. Here you have options for how the padding is going to be on the exported maps, as well as the file format type and bit depth. Now here, if you want to just browse to a location, you can click this button and then just choose the location where you're going to export these textures to. Now finally here you have this configuration, and here we have support for all kinds of different renderers. So we have support for Unreal Engine, Unity, Keyshot, Redshift, Arnold, V-Ray, and so on. Now, if you come over here to this configuration tab, you can actually see the presets and how they're created, and you can also create your own presets if you do not see your renderer listed here. The configuration tab gives you access to all the input maps, mesh maps, as well as converted map types so that you can virtually create any type of export preset that you need from Substance Painter. So for example, if we take a look here at, say, the Arnold 5 AR standard preset, you can see that we have a list of these output maps, and the channels here are color coded so you can see the map types that are going to be exported for each of these channels. For instance, here we have this base color, and the base color here is listed as the base color input map, meaning the channel that you have. Here for Arnold 5, we're talking about exporting base color, metal, rough, normal, height, and emissive. Now, if we look at something else, let's say V-Ray, where we're going to have to use some converted map types because V-Ray is not going to support the metallic roughness workflow. So here you can see that we're going to be exporting things like diffusion, reflection, glossiness, IOR. So here, if we take a look at this particular map type, reflection, we can see that this is actually going to be this converted map here for reflection. So Substance Painter is able to convert the metallic roughness outputs to specific map types that you need for renderers such as V-Ray. Here we also have the IOR, so in terms of V-Ray, this is going to produce that 1/IOR map that you need for the V-Ray material. And like I said, you can also create your own preset. So here, if I create a new preset by clicking the plus button, I can come into here and say, okay, well, I'm going to create an RGB output. I'm going to use a couple of these flags, like I want to use the mesh. Here, let's do this. Let's use a couple of these flags. So we're going to say I want to use the project underscore, and then here I'm going to use the texture set name. And then for this RGB image, let's say that I want to use base color. I can just simply take the base color channel, left click, drag and drop it right here over the RGB channel, and then choose from RGB channels. Now this is going to link this input map here to this specific export output preset. Now here I can do something like an RGB split, so this lets me pack a map. So for instance, in this case, I might want to do something like take my metallic map and place that into the red channel. We'll say gray channel. Then we'll take something like our roughness. We'll place that into the green channel. Gray channel we'll use again. And then here we can use something like ambient occlusion, and we'll place this here in the blue channel from gray channel. And then here we can use this export preset as like a packed map. Now again, when you go to your export tab and it's time to export, you just choose here from the configuration tab what preset you want to work with. Like in my case here, I could export my project texture sets here to Redshift. We have a specific rendering space in our documentation. So if you go here, you can see that we have listed a lot of these third-party renderers. So for example, if we take a look here at V-Ray, we can get some information about V-Ray and how to use V-Ray for things like 3ds Max or Maya. So I use Maya, so if I come over here to Maya, you can see that we're going to have information on how to export maps from Substance Painter for use in V-Ray. So here we have a chart that's going to let you know what the substance texture is going to export and what V-Ray input material that plugs into. And here you can see the texture is actually hooked up to the V-Ray material inside of Maya. You'll see something similar here in 3ds Max. So again, same information, and it's going to tell you how to hook up the maps for use with 3ds Max and V-Ray. So that is going to conclude this video on rendering with Iray. Some of the key takeaways from this was how we were able to take that glass shader that we created, that instant shader copy, and then we went into the shader settings for this glass. We just used the refraction setting, so we set this to 1. IOR, I just left it at 1.5 in this case. Framed up our shot, we set our environment, and then we came and activated some post effects to do some color grading to finish off our portfolio image, and then finally we talked about being able just to share this directly to ArtStation. So this is going to conclude this Getting Started with Substance Painter 2018 course. I hope you had fun and enjoyed it, and be sure to check out the other courses we have on Substance Academy. Thanks a lot for hanging with me, and I'll see you next time.